How are you?
I'm all right. I'm a bit. I always find the Chrism Eucharist quite. It quite exhausting. So we're thinking about Easter, though, in this context, and we're jumping to Matthew 28.
Yeah.
And what are your reflections on that?
So Matthew 28, 1 to 10. So Mary and Mary come to the tomb. And that's all that Matthew writes, which suggests that unlike in Mark's Gospel, where they were coming to anoint the body, this may be hinting that Matthew thinks they took seriously Jesus' pre-forecasts that he would be risen on the third day. So it says, rather curiously, they came to the tomb to see. And Matthew also, unlike Mark's Gospel, has the earthquake in this passage. And in Matthew's Gospel, there are three seismoi, aren't there? There's a seismoi, there's an earthquake associated with Jesus asleep in the boat. There's one associated with the crucifixion, Matthew 27, and there's this, Matthew 28, verse 2. And each of the occasions, what do we find? We find that the disciples think that Jesus is unable to help, either because he's asleep, or because he's dead, or because he's disappeared. And in each case, they're proved wrong. So whether there's something about this seismic shift that's indicative, well, we just don't know. But the angel seems to, in some ways, sum up the gospel. Do not be afraid. He is risen. He has gone before you to Galilee. There you will see him. And if you look at each of these, kind of the do not be afraid. I think I read somewhere there's something like 366 times that do not be afraid. That refrain is used in the Bible. One for each day of the year and one extra one for when you're really petrified. Who knows? But there's something about our fear being eclipsed by resurrection that means we live differently. He is raised. Wow. I mean, that isn't something you can bolt onto a worldview. That's the foundation of a completely different worldview. And he has gone before you to Galilee. And Eugene Peterson talks about this as Galilee is, well, it could be the place, it's our place really. It's where we work, where we live, where we move and have our being. Yeah. So he's there. And then there you will see him. Yeah. So in other words, keep your eyes peeled. He's not disappeared in the sense that he is, no longer here, but invisibly present and able to be perceived and very much present and powerful for us. So we have this, and then they leave the tomb with this mixture of fear and joy we find in Matthew's Gospel. So it's not quite just the negative feelings of Mark. There's the joy, and Rowan Williams talks about this, doesn't he? He says, the reason that he felt that Thomas didn't believe the disciples is they weren't joyful enough about it. And that actually one of the things that helps to convict people of our faith is the fact that our rather anxious self-preoccupation has been eclipsed by an awareness and a living out of a matchless goodness, such as we realise is to be celebrated in the ongoing presence of our risen Lord. So, and the last thing I suppose I'd point out is, I know I mentioned this occasionally about Leslie Newbigin and reading to him, but one of the things he said in an off-the-cuff way was he asked me, so what was the last public thing that Jesus did? And I went, public thing. And I said, he died? He said, good, that's right. I went, yes. So the last public thing he did was crucifixion. In other words, his death. And actually when he appears as a risen Lord, he appears to specific groups. But he reckoned that, there is a theological point to this, that actually that Christ is the first fruits, but it is for us to live out the resurrection and these promises in the space afforded us between times, between resurrection and the final consummation of all things in the kingdom. So
well, just a couple of thoughts in relation to that. one of the things that strikes me about Matthew's account, you mentioned the earthquake and you mentioned the angel. Both of them are signs of God's action. God sends the angel, God causes the earthquake. And therefore, the first thing that Matthew is telling us is that the resurrection is God's action. This is something God has done. Yeah. And then the second thing that I'm struck by is that you mentioned the women coming without any particular sense of why they were coming, except they were coming to see. They hear the angel, and yes, they were afraid, but they were also joyful. They believed what they heard, not what they saw. They didn't go in and, we've got, Peter looking in and seeing the tomb was empty and believing, or John believing, and that wasn't the process for them. The process was hearing the angel's proclamation and believing the proclamation. Yeah. Then they bump into Jesus after that. Yeah. But they were going off, following the instructions of the angel. They were going off to tell the disciples, so they were going to be missionaries to the disciples and bump into Jesus, where that which they had been told is confirmed. But it's if you think about, as I think about the life of this Christian community that Matthew is writing in the context of, community we assume is in Antioch, they will have believed because of what they've heard, not because of what they've seen. And you get the same point in John's Gospel with Thomas, when Jesus says, "Blessed are those who believe and yet have not seen." Yeah. And so there's something quite profound there, because that, as you say, Galilee is our home, is us. This is us too.
And it's interesting the detail that Matthew puts in, how the angel in front of Mary and Mary removes the stone to show them that the tomb is empty. Mm-hmm. So actually, and the explanation is that they need to hear is that he is risen. It's not that they put their heads in and see and put two and two together. Yeah. Yeah. So it is a different kind of pedagogy, if you like.
And I'm struck that in the end, what we get again, if you sort of join the whole circle of Matthew's Gospel, which of course when we get to the end of this chapter we see particularly expressed, but when we join the whole circle of Matthew's Gospel, that sense of God with us, of Emmanuel, is borne out with God's presence and in the action of the resurrection, and then his presence in Jesus embodied. But I'm struck by our own experience that we probably come to believe in the resurrection through hearing it first and then seeing it in some way or other, experiencing it in some way or other. We don't, I suspect, we don't experience it and then say, that was the resurrection.
Yeah, and perhaps we do need to hear it first, because only on the basis of having heard it will we be able to see in a way that frames what we see in terms of
understand what we're seeing. Yeah, absolutely. So, in anticipation, a very happy Easter.
Yeah, a joyful Easter to you too, brother.